Highbridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Search Heartache by Carla Malden. Read by Jane Oppenheimer. Prologue. I must have been 12 years old when I first heard the joke. I know I was in the 7th grade, because at the Ridgepoint School for Girls, the 7th graders were entrusted with carrying out the flag salute ceremony every Friday, in all its pomp and patriotism. The entire lower school, kindergarten through grade 7, lined up in our crisp, white cotton uniforms. Monday through Thursday, the bucolic campus swarmed with girls in pink, yellow, and powder blue, as though scattered with prepubescent Easter eggs. But white on Friday. Always white on Friday. These traditions had kept the creme de la creme of Los Angeles young womanhood on the straight and narrow for nearly a century. And you never broke the rules. At least, Maura Locke didn't. Not me. I was standing in the flag salute line, staring down at my saddle shoes. They were so caked with white polish that it looked like the creases across the instep were smiling up at me. I was glad it wasn't my week to perform the actual raising of the flag. That was nerve-wracking. The unfolding, the clipping of the hooks through the brass rings, the hand over hand on the rope. I hated the pressure. No, this week all I had to do was march out, stand there, and slap my hand over my heart. I would keep an eye on Miss Zipser, my teacher, a study in adamant spinsterhood. Even then an old-fashioned word, but so excruciatingly appropriate. Miss Zipser had a thing for patriotism, especially now that her dream come true was in the White House, a wavy-haired movie star pledged to safeguard the conservative values she held so dear. On Flag Salute Friday, Miss Zipser conducted the proceedings. She stood ramrod straight, as though steel encased the fibers of her every nerve, if indeed nerve fiber existed at all in this woman, who passed her years, one after the other, holding court in front of a room full of girls on the brink of life. She would place her hand on her heart, right on her anatomical heart, between her conical breasts, beneath her pearls. Sometimes we bet on whether Miss Zipser would manage to squeeze out a few tears as we pledged our allegiance. She loved her country that much. On this particular Friday, Betsy Nagle stood behind me. She leaned in close to my ear, breaching the mandated 9 inches of airspace between Ridgepoint girls standing in line. I could smell the sickly sweetness of the pomade Betsy used to slick back her ponytail. A ponytail so tight it gave me a headache just to look at her. I never would have thought I'd hear a dirty joke from Betsy Nagle. It wasn't dirty, really. I knew that. But still, it was about sex. Or something like it, anyway. "These groupies are hanging around backstage at a concert?" breathed Betsy. One of them says, "I slept with John Bon Jovi last night." And another one asks, "How was he?" "He's good," she says, "but he's no Mick Jagger." The next day the first one says, "Last night I slept with Bruce Springsteen. How was he?" That was the part that struck me. The notion that a girl would actually ask another girl that question. How was he? So matter of fact. It punched a hole in my romantic notion of an out-of-body, swept-away experience. It sounded more like comparing hamburgers. He was good, but he's no Mick Jagger. Not enough ketchup. Then they ran into each other a few days later. The girl says, "You'll never believe who I slept with last night. Mick Jagger." "Well, how was he?" "He's good, but he's no Mick Jagger." Betsy Nagle's joke made no sense. How could Mick Jagger not be Mick Jagger? We had recently finished reading Alice in Wonderland, while Miss Zipser highlighted figures of speech and the hipper girls mined the text for hidden drug-related meaning. I liked the story precisely as it read, even if parts of it confused me. This Jagger joke reminded me of the line, I can't go back to yesterday because I was a different person then. Weren't you always yourself? Wasn't Mick Jagger, by definition, as good as Mick Jagger? If Mick Jagger didn't define Mick Jaggerness, then who did? I suspected there was some sort of irony at play. We had recently completed a unit on irony in English, verbal, dramatic, and situational. I had aced the end-of-unit test, but I was glad this joke had not been one of the questions. I would have had a hard time categorizing which type of irony applied, and would have had to go with all of the above, an option that always made me feel uneasy, if not outright defeated. I nodded a silent, "That's a good one," to Betsy, as I noticed a tiny splotch of white polish on the navy saddle of my right shoe. I hoped the line monitor wouldn't give me a demerit. Demerits were so humiliating. Not that I had ever gotten one. At lunch, my best friend, Gwen Caddison, told me the same joke. It was going around. Gwen substituted the Who's Roger Daltrey and Marty Balin of Jefferson Starship. So that was it. Not really a joke so much as a game where you slipped in different names. Carrot Stick half chomped, I proposed, "He's good, but he's no Weird Al." Gwen laughed so hard that her tab came out of her nose. Gwen countered, "He's good, but he's no Captain." "Huh? Antonil?" "Good one." We went on like that through lunch. The game would run all the way through our high school years. The game where you could talk about having sex with a pantheon of rock stars, swapping one for the other willy-nilly. Eventually, I realized that the joke wasn't about rock stars. It wasn't even about sex. It was about promise and hope. It was about greener grass. Mostly, it was about disillusionment. Chapter 1. "I'm going to have to start wearing my glasses on one of those chains," I said. I was sitting on the bed, propped against 4 pillows, filing the rough spot on a fingernail I had been fidgeting with all day. I stretched my arm out straight, willing my fingers 6 inches farther away. "You know," I said to Adam, "those chains you wear around your neck?" "Like an old lady?" He was slouched on the foot of the bed in his underwear, remote control in hand, adding the latest channels to the box. Netflix, Prime, Hulu, HBO. Behind these icons, neatly arranged on the screen, was a new generation of media tycoons flush with cash and buying shows like drunken sailors. My husband was an agent in the motion picture television department of a major talent agency, his father's. It was part of his job to make sure the agency was selling what the entertainment providers were buying, though entertainment value often seemed the least of the transaction. "I beg your pardon?" I said. "Old lady." "Nothing," he said, as he added the car chase channel to the lineup. But I knew perfectly well what he had said. Old lady. Old. Lady. Old. I thought about filing the rest of my nails to match the newly shortened one, but that seemed several fingers too many to cope with right now, especially since I couldn't see. "Would you turn down the air?" I asked. It was barely early spring, but the temperatures had been late summer high the last several days, calm and still, what people in LA sometimes call earthquake weather. I had turned on the AC for the first time since last summer. Adam didn't answer. He was watching a promo for the new Ken Burns documentary. This time out, The Dust Bowl. They were hyping it as the worst man-made ecological disaster in history. "I wonder if that's true," Adam said. "What?" "About the Dust Bowl." "People thought it meant the end of the world," I said, uninterested. "Maura, people always think everything means the end of the world." "It's blowing right on me," I said. "Would you turn off the air?" Adam got up from the edge of the bed and studied the thermostat. The AC shut off with a troublesome click. That doesn't sound good, he said. No, I agreed. Adam resumed his channel reprogramming. I picked up my book. I had decided that twice a year I was going to read one of the classics that had slipped through the cracks of my education. I was currently slogging through The Great Gatsby, not really enjoying it, but determined to finish. No amount of fire or freshness can challenge what a man will store up in his ghostly heart, I read silently. I read the line again, hoping to commit it to memory, along with the Faulkner, Joyce, and Proust I had stored in the hope chest in my brain that I doubted would ever be opened. You better call the air-conditioning people, Adam said, as he climbed into bed. I nodded. Done. Adam rolled onto his side, his back to me, and let out a sigh that said how good it felt to finally be in bed. Or, more likely, another day, another dollar. I read to the end of the chapter, then turned out the light. When I was a small child, I had a recurring nightmare of being chased by a witch. I ran but could not escape, opened my mouth but could not scream. I looked over my shoulder, and there she was, the witch behind me, closer and closer, until she was close enough to reach out and run a long, pointy fingernail down my back. I would wake up, the last tingle of sharp nail bursting at the base of my spine. That witch hadn't made an appearance in 40 years. But this particular night she paid me a call. And when I awoke at 2 a.m., nightmare heart thumping, Adam's side of the bed was empty. I didn't hear him in the bathroom. I waited a few more minutes, assuming he would appear with a glass of water, and most likely smelling of Oreos or something else chocolate. I had picked up a pint of Ben & Jerry's latest concoction, 50 Shades of Chocolate. If the middle of the night munchies hit, Adam wouldn't be able to resist. I knew there would be no falling back to sleep after my nightmare, so I headed down to the kitchen to join Adam, hoping there would be a shade or two left for me. As I passed Adam's study, the light from his computer caught my eye, its eerie glow a sort of technological Cheshire cat grin suspended in the darkness. On screen were two bodies, a man and a woman. Naked. Legs entangled. Arms entangled. Flashes of thigh. Flashes of breast. Flashes of who knows what, who knows where. A man and a woman having sex. As if in a horror movie, from out of nowhere, Adam's chair rolled slowly up to the desk. I knew the witch would be sitting in it. I was still trapped in my nightmare. Don't scream. Don't wake Adam and Stephanie. But it wasn't the witch after all. It wasn't a nightmare. It was Adam sitting in the chair, his back to the door, his sandy hair matted where a half-hour earlier it had been wedged into his pillow. Something about Adam's demeanor stopped me from going in, from uttering a word. He sat there, quite still, right elbow on the desk, chin in hand, left hand hovering over the mouse. I held my breath and took a silent step backward. This was a different kind of nightmare. My husband was watching porn. On screen, nothing extraordinary seemed to be going on between the sheets. Nothing acrobatic or gymnastic. Barely aerobic. There were no stilettos, no leather, no handcuffs, or silken restraints. Just two people in a slightly grainy video. What there did seem to be was a surprising tenderness between these two players. An intimacy that made me look away for a moment. That made me feel like a voyeur. This didn't feel like a spectator sport. This felt like intruding. The woman was young, barely more than a girl, really. The camera was not stationed at the foot of the bed, but rather off to the side, trained more on her than him. The girl turned her head, opened her eyes, and looked straight into the lens. The man's shoulder pressed against her cheek, but when he propped himself up, lifting the bulk of his weight off of her, I could make out the girl's face. Deep-set almond eyes, broad forehead, a hollow sculpted by her cheekbones that no amount of cosmetic contouring could create. Her lips were wide and full. They curved gracefully into an upturned smile as she gazed into the camera. I had no idea that porn stars came with such finishing school features. I was about to say something to Adam, something cutting that would make him wither. But just then, on screen, the rhythmic intakes of air and their throaty replies, a sort of guttural call and response, were interrupted. "Oh, my God," said the man's voice, an involuntary utterance. "Oh, my God, Minou." Why was Adam talking to the screen? And then the voice spoke again. "Minou." Yes, it was definitely Adam's voice, but it was not coming from him, not from the Adam sitting there at the desk, but from the man on screen. Yes, it was Adam on the screen. Yes, it was Adam on top of the beautiful girl. Yes, it was Adam making love to another woman. Yes, it was Adam calling this other woman Minou, the French word for kitten that he had called me when we were young. That's why the scene seemed so intimate. Because the man was my husband. A vice tightened around my chest. I was seized by an urge to leap to Adam where he sat in his hydraulically controlled desk chair and pound him, to grab the closest, heaviest object, the Waterford clock perhaps, and shatter it over his skull. I tamped down the impulse, not only because I was by nature no murderer, but because at that moment the on-screen Adam shuddered. The words, "God, yes," escaped from his lips with that very particular coital huskiness. Then he laid his cheek against the girl's, gently, ever so gently, and ran the back of his index finger along her quite perfect jaw. I caught my breath long enough to see that this was not exactly my Adam, but an earlier Adam, a younger Adam, as young as when I had first met him. No, even younger. I could see it now. His on-screen face, at least what I could make out of it, was fuller and unlined. His hair was thicker and longer, flipping at the back of his neck. As if to prove the point, the girl reached around and twirled a lock around her finger, as though this was something she did regularly, as though she had done it 1,000 times. It was a gesture of ownership. My stomach flipped. Then the camera caught Adam opening his eyes. They looked softer than I had seen them in years. How they looked was full of promise. Adam, the Adam seated right there, right now at the computer, rested his head in his palms and covered his eyes with splayed fingers. His entire upper body sank into his hands, not with shame, but with a weight of insupportable loss. He remained slumped there, eyes covered, so that when I slipped away he never knew that I had been standing in the doorway watching. Back in bed I lay awake, trusting the darkness to calm my heart. No chance. Soon Adam edged back in next to me. I pretended to be asleep. It was either that or unleash the fury ignited by the scene in his study. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to imagine a scenario that made it all right, to come up with the twist that explained the crazy misunderstanding that had sent the second act spinning but made everyone hug and laugh before the final credits. I had not come up with one by the time Adam began to snore. I stole back down to Adam's study and stared at the computer. Only now there was no skin on skin, simply the screensaver. A chronological jumble of photos of our daughter, Stephanie as a toothless 7-year-old, then 14, dressed as a beatnik for Halloween. an infant babbling at a merry-go-round mobile, and last year, at 16, waving her driver's license. I slid my hand along the side of the iMac, but detected no slot. I used both hands, running them around the perimeter of the thing. No slot anywhere. Adrenalized, I'd forgotten this evolutionary step. Could it have been that long since I'd slipped a CD into a computer for Stephanie to build Sim City or dance along with Kids in Motion? Of course, Adam's new computer, already a year or two old, was slot-free. Everything was in the cloud, including his past, it seemed. I scrutinized the desktop for an icon that might lead to the video. Nothing. I opened files inside of folders, more files, more folders. No clues, no sex tape. Nothing unusual. I clicked on history. It had been wiped clean. Why would Adam erase his history? And why was he suddenly compelled to revisit it? I was out of luck. But then it came to me, the saga of the incredible vanishing term paper. It had been last December, the week before winter break, when Stephanie's epic essay, At Play in the Field of Roald Dahl's Mind, had evaporated into thin computer air. How-to manuals are anathema to me, but I had sat at Stephanie's side, a collection of dummies books on the desk in front of us, until we recovered the treatise, safe and sound. Just stay calm, I had repeated to Stephanie throughout the ecological dig. Just stay calm. I said it to myself now. Just stay calm. Just stay calm. Then I clicked on the Finder icon. I would not have believed the steps to retrieval had actually been filed away in my brain, but there they were. I opened the Spotlight window. When the computer asked what kind of file, I typed in movie. I clicked on Within Last Day. Like magic, one title popped up. Only one. A&A. Closed 2:47 a.m. It took me a second to realize this was it, like staring at the winning numbers on a lottery ticket. I had missed the beginning of the tape earlier. Now, here it was, on screen. The bed was empty, waiting. The covers were thrown back, the sheets already rumpled. The camera swished onto target, Blair Witch style, accompanied by a soundtrack of giggling. I could hear Adam's voice, but could not make out what he was saying. Then the girl, unspeakably lovely, devastatingly young, entered the frame. She lay down on the bed, fully naked, as though she did this every day. Had I ever been that comfortable with my own nakedness in my whole life? No, I had not. The camera racked into focus. I pictured Adam's face pressing against the eyepiece. Had they planned this for days, or was it spontaneous? Had it been her idea? His? Was it commemorating a beginning or an end? Or was it just for fun? I clicked on the little diagonal arrows at the bottom right, expanding the picture to full screen. Adam was there now, too, lying naked next to the girl. I stared at the screen, the two young lovers facing each other side by side, her leg draped over his, kissing and laughing. I could hear them laughing. Then the giggling dissolved, replaced by breathing, shallow and increasingly urgent. I hovered over the pause button. I knew I should click on it, stop right now, but could not. Impossible to click. I was held captive. This is where I had come in, as it were, as though it were a movie whose beginning I'd missed at the multiplex. The moment when the girl turned to the camera and smiled. I steeled myself for what came next. God, yes. By the fourth time I played the video, I was mouthing the words along with Adam. By the seventh, I said them aloud with him. Like the flying monkeys in The Wizard of Oz, like Benjamin rattling the church window in The Graduate, like Sophie making the choice to hand over her daughter. The on-screen image of my pre-husband and this girl was now part of my DNA. I pushed back from the desk and wondered if I could let that be the end of it. Did I have it in me to keep my mouth shut? I was silent at breakfast. I stared at the Ezekiel sprouted grain English muffin on the plate in front of me. I preferred the traditional white brand with its nooks and crannies, but always felt compelled by the healthier alternative. I spread a thick coating of all-fruit apricot butter on the thing, though I could not bring myself to take a bite. Adam sat across from me, spooning oatmeal into his mouth. I made it for him every morning, the long-cooking, steel-cut kind. Monday through Friday, I stood at the stove stirring for 15 minutes to keep his arteries roto-rootered. My reward? Finding him in the middle of the night, seated at his desk, watching himself fuck another woman. I resented how this episode had changed me overnight. I was never that girl who could use the word fuck, especially as an active verb. I stared at him, my head cocked slightly to the left. He knew what that meant. He was chewing too loudly. I had a thing about chewing noises, and he knew it. Had known it for 20 years. He made a show of the next bite, silent as could be, and I smiled in return. That was my part of the routine. And this morning I didn't want anything to be off. My marriage was supposed to be like that Buddhist adage about hands, how we have a right hand and a left hand, and they never fight or take credit. The left hand doesn't say, I wrote that word. The right hand never says, I turned that page. They simply help each other. When one hand is injured, the other takes over. My marriage was like those hands, intertwined so that sometimes you couldn't even tell which finger belonged to which hand. But this morning, I was the hand that stirred the oatmeal, and Adam was the hand on the mouse of the computer, and they were bodies apart. Stephanie slouched in, grabbed a carton of yogurt from the refrigerator, and plopped herself down at the table. Mornings were not her friend. I can't pick a topic, she said. She was 6 months away from college applications, but there had already been great debate about the topic of a topic. We'll figure it out, I said. They're all so... She rolled her eyes in exaggerated frustration. Are you with us or against us? Adam said. With you, she said. That was their morning routine. As always, he smiled at her response. I was still a sucker for my husband's smile. It had the power to transform everything. In an instant, the hand gripping the wooden spoon and the hand guiding the mouse found their way back to the same body. Our morning routines were intact. Our life was good. Everything was going to be okay. But it wasn't. No matter how I tried to execute a soul-deep count to 10, there was a buzzing inside me that I couldn't swat away. I tried to stem the adrenaline with housework. I watered the cacti in the greenhouse window. I hunted in the back of the broom closet for the special cloth meant for cleaning electronics, and ran it over every television and computer in the house. Except the one in Adam's office. It produced a tiny effervescent crackle of static that sounded like the frayed edges of my nerves. I cleaned the coffee maker with a solution of white vinegar and water. Once a year I took the time and care to dust my snow globe collection. I've been collecting them since I was a little girl, and they lived behind beveled glass doors in a cabinet in the den. I had dusted them 7 or 8 months ago, but there was always something meditative about the task, so I gathered a few chamois and a bottle of spritz. I removed each globe from its particular spot, heading backward in time. There was Mickey Mouse, reminding me of Stephanie's first trip to Disneyland. A palm tree from an anniversary trip, our 3rd to Hawaii. And from a Ridge Point school trip to D.C., the tower at Dulles International, with a jet taking off in the foreground, angling adventurously into the sky. There were probably 30 of them by now. It felt good to shine them up. It felt good to hold them. Their cool smoothness reassured me. I shook one or two, watching the minute bits of glitter snow swirl.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?